What up, HyperChange? Welcome to another episode. Today, I'm doing an update with all my thoughts on Bitcoin. Full disclosure, I own Bitcoin, but I am selling my Bitcoin. I have a Coinbase account. The reason I'm selling has nothing to do with Bitcoin or my thesis around the currency, but simply the fact that I'm broke and I need to fund HyperChange somehow. So I've been thinking a lot about how I could explain my rationale about Bitcoin. I realize I just don't have the technical expertise to do it. So the best way I can pitch you Bitcoin is why I'm long the cryptocurrency and what my thoughts are on it and why I'm convinced enough to own it for myself. For those of you who don't know what Bitcoin is, I'm gonna put an explainer video that I think is awesome. It's a little cartoon in the description, but my brief explanation would be, it's a decentralized internet-based currency founded on this new technology called the blockchain, which is a distributed ledger, basically just a list of every single transaction that has gone down in the Bitcoin universe. Because it's on the internet and it's decentralized, nobody can stop Bitcoin. It's impossible to shut it down unless you shut down the entire internet. The other thing is, it's based on a mathematical formula which limits the eventual supply of Bitcoin. Right now, according to CoinDesk, there's about 16.6 million Bitcoins in circulation. Eventually, the amount of Bitcoin will max out at 21 million. From my Googling, it looks like this will happen around the year 2030 or 2040. So we know that there's only 21 million Bitcoins in existence that will ever be created. Based on using this fact, with the current price of Bitcoin, we can get a market capitalization of the currency. Right now, I'm looking at Bitcoin, it's trading at about 4,000 per coin, times 21 million gets us to a market capitalization of 84 billion. So that sounds big. It would be a pretty big company. It's about 20% bigger than Tesla's current market cap, but in the scope of currencies and global assets like gold, this is still only a drop in the bucket. And unlike every other fiat currency like the US dollar, the euro, the Chinese yuan, the Japanese yen, they're all victims to inflation and printing more currency. Nothing is backing these currencies other than the central bank's willingness and people's trust to accept those currencies. I would argue gold is a shiny rock, Bitcoin is a piece of code, and the US dollar or any other fiat currency is just a piece of paper. None of them really have inherent value. You can't eat any of these things. They're not water, they're not tuna, they're not guns. They're not gonna keep you alive in the apocalypse, but they are all stores of value and all compete. And what I think makes Bitcoin so unique and is why people compare it to digital gold is because the supply is fixed with 21 million. You can't just print more. The US dollar supply is constantly expanding. The Federal Reserve is constantly printing more US dollars, and this is not a decision that taxpayers get to make. It's a decision that the Federal Reserve makes on its own, and this is the same for every single other country's fiat currency. So very simply, with Bitcoin, we have something where the supply is fixed. With every other fiat currency, we have something where the supply is not fixed, it's growing. Therefore, on a very simple basis, if the utility of each currency stays the same, I would expect Bitcoin to rise in value relative to every fiat currency simply because its supply is not being diluted. For instance, it's well known that China typically tries to devalue its currency to stay more competitive in trade. These are the type of things that actually enable and encourage Bitcoin, because if your local currency is consistently being devalued relative to all other stores of value in the world, you're immediately going to want to transfer your money that you make from your local currency into one of these stores of value so your value is not eroding. And I think that is the exact use case of Bitcoin, and that is why I think it's such a fascinating technology. I don't really know how to say it. It's like a gut check on the financial system. If you're a fiat nation before, all your other competitors were central banks with fiat currencies. Now you're not only competing with other central banks and fiat currencies, but you're also competing with Bitcoin. When a country like Venezuela is trying to devalue its dollar to pay off its debt, then it's only incentivizing its constituents to move their capital into Bitcoin, which cannot be devalued or controlled by the government. So I think it's a fascinating era in global finance where for the first time ever, because of the internet and because of Bitcoin, consumers many times have an option to hold something that is a much better store of value than their local currency. In fact, I have this weird kind of dystopian theory where in the future, if every fiat currency continues to be devalued by its central bank, everybody who earns wages will immediately transfer all of their money into a cryptocurrency when the second they earn it, so it maintains that value, and they'll only leave their money in their local currency for what they want to spend. And if you take a step back, the internet is only 20 years new. So therefore, you know, Bitcoin, I think we're so early in seeing the revolution of internet-based currencies, but to me, these are inevitably the future of finance and commerce. Is something that's digitally native, based on the internet, that was designed for the digital future that we live in, not a piece of paper. One of the biggest risks to Bitcoin is that a very large country or company decides to implement or create its own version of Bitcoin, something very similar, basically copy all the attributes of Bitcoin and launch its own cryptocurrency to rival it. That is one of the biggest risks for cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin out there. And the reason why I'm talking about Bitcoin, most of what I've said applies to every cryptocurrency, is because it's the one I own, it's the one I'm most familiar with, it's been around the longest, it has the biggest market cap. In my opinion, it's one of the most stable cryptocurrencies. This is a good time to bring up, there's a huge trend of all these ICOs, initial coin offerings now, which I frankly am pretty skeptical about. And I know I got a couple requests to look into one like 10x and things like that. I did check it out. Frankly, I don't really understand what's going on here. And my gut instinct is that everybody who I've talked to in these ICOs, the bulk of these investors are retail investors who aren't familiar with cryptocurrencies, don't understand the technology, aren't necessarily investing in the team or the vision behind the currency. They're just trying to make a quick flip and get in on this ICO craze. My guess is that this is a bubble and that it's gone way too mainstream, and I personally wouldn't touch any ICO. I don't think they make sense. I don't fully understand them, but I could be totally wrong. Maybe they're the new wave. So Bitcoin is currently at 4,000. Now let's get back to the valuation. That puts the market cap at about 84 billion, assuming there'll be 21 million Bitcoin outstanding. A lot of people compare the potential of Bitcoin to the potential of gold. And I frankly think that makes a lot of sense, because gold has traditionally been this store of value that you think is protected from inflation, where the supply is relatively fixed. Gold has essentially been that store of value in our society. Bitcoin offers many of the same attributes, but it's just much easier to transfer because it's digitally native. It's not a really heavy rock. If you assume that Bitcoin has this anti-inflation characteristic, fixed supply, it will be a store of value within our society, not even a medium to transact, then you would think in theory it has the same potential to reach the same market capitalization of gold. Based on my research, it looks like there's about 7 trillion US dollars worth of gold in the world. If Bitcoin's market capitalization were to rise to 7 trillion, we'd be looking at the price per Bitcoin to be 333,000 per Bitcoin. That's almost 100x from today's price of 4,000 if it reaches parity with the market cap of gold. Those are kind of my thoughts on Bitcoin. And it kills me to sell Bitcoin because I want to own this thing for years, and I'm still holding a big chunk of my Bitcoin that I'm planning on not selling. But the bottom line is, I got to tell you guys what's up. I've been selling a little bit of my Bitcoin recently to fund HyperChange, so it's a bummer, but that is what it is. But I'm still incredibly bullish on this technology. Even if you're skeptical, even if you don't believe it, you gotta be watching this. This is a new frontier. It's a new technology that has gained undeniable traction in our financial system, is becoming more and more prevalent by the day. Can't write this thing off as a fraud like Jamie Dimon. You gotta study it and accept that this is potentially the most disruptive thing to happen to our modern financial system ever. Since the fiat currency, this is potentially the most disruptive thing. On the flip side, like I said at the beginning of this episode, I'm not a coder. I don't have technical expertise. I don't understand the true behind the scenes workings of Bitcoin. And therefore, who knows? For all I know, there could be a massive hack. Everybody freaks out. All the trust in Bitcoin dissipates tomorrow and this thing goes to zero. That's not out of the question for me either. Another thing is China has been cracking down on Bitcoin. This is something that we could see accelerate. And if other governments decide to crack down on Bitcoin too, it could just become so difficult to access the technology that it effectively dies. To sum it up, I see huge potential in Bitcoin. I think there's a huge possibility and trajectory for this to be as prevalent as gold within our society over the next 5 to 10 years. And we see an 80 to 100x fold increase in the price per Bitcoin. I also think there's an equally likely chance that something goes horribly wrong with the technology, all trust fails, or some government intervention happens and Bitcoin goes to zero and ends up totally worthless. That wraps it up. Those are my thoughts on Bitcoin. Love to know what you guys think in the comments. Any ideas, let me know. That's HyperChange. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.